The stones struck hard against Sarah O'Malley's back as she ran blindly through the dusty streets of Copper Creek, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. Behind her, the furious voices of her own family echoed in the hot summer air of 1875, their accusations slicing deeper than the rocks they hurled. "Witch, devil's whore," her uncle bellowed, his face contorted with rage beneath his Sunday hat. "You'll not bring your wickedness into our home again." Sarah stumbled forward, her simple cotton dress torn at the hem, blood seeping through the fabric where a jagged stone had found its mark. At 22, she had never imagined her own kin would turn on her with such venom, all because she'd been caught reading medical books and mixing herbal remedies for the town's ailments when the doctor was 3 days' ride away. The town square opened before her, filled with the Saturday market crowd who now parted like the Red Sea, watching with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination as the respected O'Malley family drove their own daughter from their midst. Sarah's vision blurred with tears, her legs weakening as a particularly large stone struck her shoulder, sending her sprawling into the dust. "Please," she gasped, raising a hand in supplication toward the crowd of onlookers. Not one stepped forward. These were people she'd known all her life, people whose children she had helped deliver, whose fevers she had broken with her remedies. Now they stood in silent judgment, fear overriding any compassion they might have felt. Another volley of stones flew toward her. Sarah curled into herself, preparing for the impact that never came. Instead, the thundering of hooves split the air, and a massive chestnut stallion reared between her and her pursuers, its rider a towering silhouette against the merciless Montana sun. "That's enough." The man's voice carried across the square with the force of a gunshot. "Any man who throws another stone answers to me." Sarah peered up from the dust to see a stranger dismounting in one fluid motion. His black Stetson was pulled low over his eyes, but she could make out the hard line of his jaw beneath several days' worth of stubble. A long duster coat flapped around his tall frame, revealing the gleam of a gun belt at his hip. "This ain't your concern, stranger," Sarah's uncle stepped forward, another stone clutched in his white-knuckled fist. "This is family business." The cowboy moved to stand over Sarah, his boots planted firmly in the dirt on either side of her crumpled form. "I'm making it my business." He turned slightly, revealing eyes the color of a summer storm beneath the brim of his hat. "And she's no longer your family. She's my gold." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sarah's own breath caught in her throat as the stranger reached down, offering her a calloused hand. "The name's Daniel Thornton," he said, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "And if you want to live through this day, you'll play along." Sarah hesitated only a moment before placing her trembling hand in his. What choice did she have? Her family wanted her dead, and the town would do nothing to stop them. At least this stranger had shown her more kindness in 30 seconds than her kin had in the past week. "Daniel," she whispered, testing the name on her lips as he pulled her to her feet. He kept her hand firmly in his as he turned to face the crowd. "This woman is under my protection now. She's my intended and will be leaving Copper Creek today." "Intended?" Sarah's mother pushed through the crowd, her face pale beneath her bonnet. "You can't mean to marry this abomination." Daniel's arm slid around Sarah's waist, steadying her against him. She could feel the solid warmth of him through her thin dress, smell leather and horse and something indefinably male. "Mrs. O'Malley, I presume?" His voice remained courteous, but Sarah felt the tension in his body. "I'd be careful throwing such words at your future son-in-law, especially one who's ridden with Randall's Rangers." The mention of the infamous group of frontier lawmen sent another murmur through the crowd. Even Sarah's uncle took a step back, the stone dropping from his hand. "You're making a mistake," her cousin Jeremiah warned, but there was new uncertainty in his eyes. "She consorts with the devil, makes potions, speaks to spirits." Daniel laughed, the sound rich and genuine. The only spirit I've seen her consorting with is the Holy Spirit, and the only potions I've tasted are her fine medicinal teas that saved my life after taking a Comanche arrow last spring." He turned to Sarah, his eyes holding hers with surprising intensity. "Isn't that right, my love?" Sarah found herself nodding, sliding naturally into the charade he had created. "Yes, Daniel, just as the good book teaches." Her uncle spat in the dust. "We don't want her kind here anymore. Take her if you want, but if she returns, it won't be stones next time. Understood?" Daniel's voice had turned to ice. "And if any harm comes to her from this day forward, I'll return to Copper Creek with more than just myself." His hand rested deliberately on his gun belt. "Are we clear?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Daniel turned to Sarah, his expression softening slightly. "Get what you need. We ride within the hour." Sarah glanced toward her family store and home, knowing she couldn't return there. "Everything I need is in my satchel at Widow Parker's. I've been staying there since." She trailed off, unwilling to recount the night her father had discovered her books and thrown her out. Daniel nodded once. "Then we'll collect your things and be on our way." He helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her, one strong arm wrapped securely around her waist. "Which way?" Sarah pointed toward a small house at the edge of town, trying to ignore the warmth of his chest against her back, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat a stark contrast to her own racing pulse. What had she gotten herself into? Who was this man who had appeared like an avenging angel in her darkest moment? As they rode slowly through town, the curious and hostile gazes of the townspeople following their progress, Sarah found herself leaning back against the solid strength of the stranger who had claimed her as his own. Whether he was her salvation or something far more dangerous remained to be seen, but for now she was simply grateful to be alive. At Widow Parker's modest home, the elderly woman rushed out to meet them, her rheumy eyes wide with concern. "Sarah, child, I heard the commotion from town." "Are you hurt?" "I'll be all right, Mrs. Parker," Sarah replied, wincing as Daniel helped her down from the horse, her bruised body protesting each movement. "This is Mr. Thornton." She paused, unsure how to explain. "I'm taking Miss O'Malley away from here," Daniel said smoothly, tipping his hat to the widow. "Somewhere she'll be safe." The old woman's shrewd gaze assessed him from head to toe. "And what are your intentions toward this girl, Mr. Thornton?" "She's been through enough without some scoundrel taking advantage." Daniel's expression remained impassive. "My intentions are to keep her safe, madam, nothing more, nothing less." Mrs. Parker snorted. "That's what they all say. Well, come inside, both of you. Sarah needs tending, and you look like you could use a meal before you ride off into the sunset with my favorite boarder." Inside the small house, Sarah quickly gathered her meager possessions, a few changes of clothes, her mother's locket, and most precious of all, her book of medicinal remedies and the small wooden case of herbs and tinctures she had managed to save before being thrown out of her family home. Mrs. Parker bustled about, packing food for their journey while Daniel stood guard by the window, his eyes constantly scanning the street outside. "Why are you helping me?" Sarah finally asked as she tied her satchel closed. "You don't know me." Daniel turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be judged unfairly." He nodded toward her medical supplies. "And someone with your skills shouldn't be wasted because of small-minded people." "How did you know about my skills?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've been in town 3 days." "People talk, even when they think they're being discreet." Sarah was about to question him further when Mrs. Parker returned with a bundle of food and a worried expression. "There's a group of men gathering at the end of the street," she said, handing the bundle to Daniel. "I recognize Sarah's cousins among them." Daniel's hand moved to his gun. "Then we've overstayed our welcome." He turned to Sarah. "Ready," she nodded, though her heart pounded with fear. She embraced Mrs. Parker quickly. "Thank you for everything." "God go with you, child," the widow whispered, pressing something into Sarah's hand. "My late husband's wedding band, for appearance's sake." They left through the back door, Daniel leading his horse quietly through the widow's garden. They mounted at the edge of town, Daniel once again positioning Sarah in front of him. "Hold tight," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "We're going to move fast." They rode hard for hours, leaving Copper Creek far behind. The Montana Territory stretched vast and wild around them, the endless prairie giving way to rolling foothills as they headed west. Sarah's body ached from the stones and the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, but she didn't complain. Each mile put more distance between her and the hatred in her family's eyes. As dusk approached, Daniel finally slowed their pace, guiding the horse toward a stand of cottonwoods alongside a small creek. "We'll camp here tonight," he said, dismounting and helping her down. "Are you all right?" Sarah nodded, though her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground. "I'll manage." Daniel caught her elbow, steadying her. "Let me see where they hit you. It's nothing, Sarah." His voice was firm but gentle. "I've seen wounds fester from less. Now let me see." Reluctantly, she turned, allowing him to examine the tear in her dress where blood had dried in a rusty stain across her shoulder blade. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he pushed the fabric aside. "It's not deep, but it needs cleaning," he said. "Do you have something in that box of yours for it?" Sarah nodded, surprised by his practical approach. "Yarrow tincture and some bandages." While Daniel set up camp and built a small fire, Sarah cleaned her wound as best she could, applying the tincture that stung fiercely before numbing the pain. When she returned to the fire, Daniel had coffee brewing and was slicing salt pork to fry. "Where are we headed?" she asked, settling carefully on a fallen log. Daniel poked at the fire, not meeting her eyes. "I have a small ranch near Sweetwater Creek, about 3 days' ride from here. You'll be safe there until you decide what you want to do." "And then what?" Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how completely her life had changed in the course of a single day. "What happens when we reach your ranch?" He looked up then, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "Then you're free to stay or go as you please. I meant what I told your kin, you're under my protection, but I don't own you, Sarah. You called me your gold," she said quietly. "In the square." A faint smile touched his lips. It seemed like the right thing to say at the time. He handed her a tin cup of coffee. "Get some rest. Morning comes early out here." That night, Sarah slept wrapped in Daniel's duster, the scent of leather and man surrounding her. Despite the hard ground and her aching body, she slept more peacefully than she had in weeks, knowing that for now, at least, she was safe. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Sarah awoke to find Daniel already up, tending to his horse. He had removed his hat, and for the first time, she saw him clearly in the morning light. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with strong features and dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into his collar. "You're staring," he said without turning around. Sarah flushed. "I'm trying to figure you out, Mr. Thornton." He glanced over his shoulder, that ghost of a smile playing at his lips again. "And are you having any success, Miss O'Malley?" "Not particularly." She pushed herself up, wincing at her stiff muscles. "Most men wouldn't risk themselves for a stranger." "Maybe I'm not most men." He finished with the horse and turned to face her fully. "How's your back?" "Sore, but healing." Daniel nodded, satisfied. "We should reach Miller's Station by nightfall. You can have a proper bed there." They rode more slowly that day, Daniel pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his time with Randall's Rangers. Sarah found herself relaxing in his company, even laughing at his dry humor. By midday, she had learned that he'd grown up in Pennsylvania, come west after the war, and served with the Rangers for 5 years before buying his ranch 2 years ago. "And you?" he asked as they shared a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack. "What led a proper young lady to studying medicine in secret?" Sarah looked down at her hands, rough from work despite her family's relative prosperity. "My mother fell ill when I was 14. The doctor in town couldn't help her. But there was an old woman, a Crow healer who lived at the edge of town. She gave me medicines that eased my mother's pain. She paused, remembering. After Mother died, I started visiting the old woman. She taught me about plants, about healing. When she died last year, she left me her books. And your family disapproved. They tolerated it when I kept it hidden, used my remedies themselves when they needed them. Her voice turned bitter. But when the pastor's wife started telling people I'd cured her consumption with witchcraft, well, that was different. Suddenly I was a danger to their standing in the community. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. People fear what they don't understand, even family, Sarah asked softly, especially family. There was something in his voice that made her think he spoke from experience. They reached Miller's station just as the sun was setting, a small outpost consisting of a trading post, livery, and a modest boarding house. The proprietor, a stout woman named Mrs. Miller, looked them over with shrewd eyes. "We only have one room available," she said, her gaze moving between them, "with one bed." Before Sarah could speak, Daniel placed a silver dollar on the counter. "That'll be fine. We're newly married." Mrs. Miller's expression softened slightly. "Congratulations, supper's in half an hour." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. Sarah stood awkwardly just inside the door as Daniel brought in their belongings. "I'll sleep on the floor," he said, anticipating her concern, "but for appearance's sake, we should continue our charade." Sarah twisted Mrs. Parker's borrowed ring on her finger. "Why did you tell them we were married?" Daniel set his saddlebags on the floor. "A single woman traveling alone with a man would raise questions we don't need. This way is simpler." "Nothing about this situation is simple," Sarah murmured, but she nodded in agreement. Supper was a quiet affair, with several other travelers sharing the long table in Mrs. Miller's dining room. Daniel played the part of attentive husband perfectly, filling Sarah's plate and keeping a protective hand at the small of her back. She found herself leaning into his touch, drawing comfort from his solid presence. After the meal, Daniel excused himself to check on his horse, leaving Sarah to make her way back to their room alone. She had just finished washing up when there was a soft knock at the door. "Mrs. Thornton," Mrs. Miller's voice called. "I've brought some hot water for your husband, and a salve for those bruises I noticed at supper." Sarah opened the door, thanking the older woman and accepting the steaming pitcher and small jar of salve. As she was about to close the door, Mrs. Miller placed a hand on her arm. "If you need help, dear," she said quietly, "you only need to ask. Not all men are kind, even those who seem so at first." Sarah realized what the woman was thinking, that her bruises were Daniel's doing. "Oh no, it's not, he didn't," she stopped, gathering her thoughts. "My husband saved me from those who did this. He's a good man." Mrs. Miller studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "I'm glad to hear it. Good night, dear." When Daniel returned, Sarah relayed the conversation as she poured hot water into the basin for him. "It's not a bad assumption on her part," he said, removing his hat and gun belt. "Too many women suffer at the hands of those who should protect them." "Like my family," Sarah said softly. Daniel paused in rolling up his sleeves. "Yes, like your family." He moved to the basin and began washing the trail dust from his face and neck. "Why did they turn on you so completely? There must have been more to it than just the pastor's wife's accusations." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, gathering her thoughts. "My father caught me teaching my younger sister about the healing properties of certain plants when he found my books." She shuddered at the memory. "He said I was corrupting Emily with the devil's knowledge, that I would damn her soul along with mine, and he threw you out that night. I went to Mrs. Parker's because she'd been kind to me in the past." Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. "I thought they'd calm down eventually, that they'd listen to reason. I never imagined they'd try to." Her voice broke. Daniel dried his face and came to sit beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Some people can't see past their own fear, Sarah. It doesn't mean you deserved what they did." "I know that in my head," she whispered. "My heart is taking longer to believe it." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Daniel stood. "You take the bed, I'll be fine on the floor." Sarah caught his hand before he could move away. Thank you for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. His eyes met hers, warm and steady. There's nothing to repay. Get some rest. Later, lying in the darkness, Sarah listened to Daniel's steady breathing from his makeshift bed on the floor. For the first time since her world had collapsed, she felt a tentative hope blooming in her chest. Whatever happened when they reached his ranch, she knew one thing for certain: she was no longer alone. The next 2 days of travel passed without incident, the landscape gradually changing as they moved into more rugged territory. Daniel proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out edible plants and wildlife tracks. Sarah found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, noting the grace with which he moved and the quiet competence he brought to every task. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, they crested a hill to find a small valley spread before them. A modest cabin stood near a creek, surrounded by corrals and a barn. Several horses grazed in a fenced pasture, and smoke rose lazily from the cabin's chimney. "Someone's at your ranch," Sarah said, tensing. Daniel nodded, his hand moving to his gun. "My foreman, most likely, Ellis Winters. He stays there when I'm away." He studied the scene below, "But let me go first, just to be sure." They approached cautiously, Daniel keeping Sarah slightly behind him. As they neared the cabin, the door opened, and an older man with a shock of white hair stepped out, a shotgun held loosely in his hands. "'Bout time you got back," the man called. "Was starting to think you'd found trouble in Copper Creek." "I did," Daniel replied, relaxing visibly, "but I brought it home with me. Ellis, this is Sarah O'Malley. Sarah, my foreman and friend, Ellis Winters." The older man's bushy eyebrows rose as he took in Sarah's presence. "Well now, this is unexpected." He lowered the shotgun and tipped his hat. "Madam, Mr. Winters," Sarah acknowledged, suddenly aware of how she must look after days on the trail. "Sarah will be staying with us for a while," Daniel explained, dismounting and helping Sarah down. "She needs a safe place." Ellis's shrewd eyes took in Sarah's fading bruises and the protective way Daniel stood beside her. "I see." He turned toward the cabin. "Well, I've got stew on and fresh bread. You both look like you could use a hot meal and a wash." Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with chairs, and a small sitting area with a worn sofa. 2 doors led off to what Sarah presumed were bedrooms. "You can have my room," Daniel said, setting her satchel down. "I'll bunk with Ellis in the 2nd bedroom." "I couldn't possibly. It's not up for discussion," he interrupted gently. "You need rest and privacy." Ellis watched this exchange with interest before clearing his throat. "Want to tell me what kind of trouble you found in Copper Creek, Dan?" Over bowls of venison stew and thick slices of bread, Daniel recounted the events in town, his voice hardening when he described the stone-throwing mob. Ellis listened without interruption, his weathered face growing increasingly grim. "Barbaric," he muttered when Daniel finished. "Turning on their own like that. They don't see me as their own anymore," Sarah said quietly. "I'm something else now, something to be feared." "Horseshit," Ellis said bluntly, then immediately looked contrite. "Beg pardon for my language, miss, but that's what it is. People healing people ain't something to fear, it's something to be grateful for." Sarah felt a rush of gratitude toward the gruff old man. "Thank you, Mr. Winters." "Ellis," he corrected. "Anyone who's had stones thrown at them by their own kin gets to call me Ellis." After supper, Ellis excused himself to check on the horses, leaving Sarah and Daniel alone by the fire. Sarah found herself fighting exhaustion, the warmth of the room and the first proper meal in days making her eyelids heavy. "You should get some sleep," Daniel said, noticing her struggle to stay awake. "Tomorrow will be soon enough to decide what comes next," Sarah nodded, rising from her chair. "Good night, Daniel, and thank you again." "Sleep well, Sarah." Daniel's room was neat and sparsely furnished, with a hand-carved bed covered in a quilt that had clearly seen better days. A small chest of drawers stood against one wall, and a hook on the back of the door held a mirror. Sarah unpacked her few belongings, changed into her nightgown and slipped between the sheets that smelled faintly of cedar and something uniquely Daniel. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Her mind raced with questions about her future. What would she do now? Where would she go? The thought of leaving the safety of Daniel's ranch filled her with dread, yet she couldn't impose on his hospitality indefinitely. The next morning, Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through the small window and the smell of coffee brewing. She dressed quickly in her cleanest dress and made her way to the main room where she found Daniel alone at the table, a cup of coffee in front of him. "Ellis is out checking the herd," he said, rising to pour her a cup. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. Daniel studied her over the rim of his cup. "I've been thinking about your situation." Sarah braced herself. Here it came the gentle suggestion that she should move on soon. "I could use someone with your skills here," he continued, surprising her. "We're a 2-day ride from the nearest doctor and accidents happen on a ranch." "You want me to stay?" Sarah asked, trying to understand what he was offering. "If you want to." Daniel set down his cup. "Ellis and I have been managing, but having someone who knows medicine would be valuable. And there's a small cabin about a 1/4 mile up the creek that Ellis used to use before I built the addition to this one. It needs some work, but it could be yours." Sarah's heart raced at the unexpected offer. "I don't want charity, Daniel. It's not charity, it's an exchange." His gray eyes held her steadily. "Your healing skills for a place to stay and whatever supplies you need, fair and square." It was more than fair, and they both knew it. "It was a lifeline." "I accept," Sarah said, a weight lifting from her shoulders. "Thank you." Daniel's smile transformed his face, making him look younger, more approachable. "Good, we'll ride out and look at the cabin after breakfast." The small cabin was indeed in need of work. The roof leaked in one corner, and mice had clearly made themselves at home during its vacancy, but Sarah could see its potential. One room with a small fireplace, just enough space for a bed, table, and her medical supplies. A place of her own. "It's perfect," she told Daniel, who looked relieved at her approval. "We can have it fixed up in a week or so," he said. "Until then, you're welcome to stay in the main house." They fell into an easy routine over the next few days. Sarah helped with cooking and mending while Daniel and Ellis worked on her cabin. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, talking long into the night. Sarah learned about Daniel's time in the war, his years with the Rangers, and his dream of building his small ranch into something substantial. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood, her mother's illness, and her studies with the old crow healer. A week stretched into 2, and Sarah found herself watching for Daniel's return each evening, her heart lifting at the sight of him riding in from the range. They worked side by side repairing her cabin, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed tools, each contact sending a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. On the night before she was to move into her cabin, a thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains. The rain pounded on the roof of the main house, and lightning illuminated the valley in stark flashes. Sarah sat by the fire, listening to the storm and working on a quilt Mrs. Miller had given her as a parting gift. Daniel entered from his bedroom, a book in his hand. Ellis turned in early. "Said his old bones can feel the storm in a way they never used to," Sarah smiled. "He works harder than men half his age, that he does." Daniel settled into the chair opposite her, opening his book. They sat in companionable silence, the storm raging outside while they remained warm and dry within. After a particularly loud crack of thunder, Sarah set aside her sewing. "I've been thinking about what happened in Copper Creek." Daniel closed his book, giving her his full attention. "Oh. You risked a lot for me that day. You could have been hurt," he shrugged. "It was the right thing to do." "But why?" Sarah pressed. "Why did you really help me? The truth this time." Daniel was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "My sister," he said softly. "She had the gift of sight, could tell when bad weather was coming, when a horse would foal, when someone was carrying sickness before they showed symptoms." His eyes grew distant. Our town called her a witch. Drove her out when I was away fighting. By the time I came home, she was gone. No one would tell me where. Sarah's heart ached for him. I'm so sorry, Daniel. I searched for her for 2 years before joining the Rangers, never found her. His gaze returned to Sarah, intense and unwavering. When I saw you in that square with your own family throwing stones, I couldn't stand by. Not again. So I remind you of your sister, Sarah said, trying to ignore the disappointment that followed this realization. No, Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You remind me that there's still goodness worth protecting in this world, that healing and kindness deserve defending. He paused, his voice dropping lower. And if I'm being completely honest, Sarah, you've become far more to me than just someone to protect. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? Instead of answering, Daniel stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling before her. I mean that watching you build a new life here, seeing your strength and your compassion, it's changed something in me, made me want things I thought I'd given up on. Daniel, let me finish. He took her hands in his. I didn't save you that day in Copper Creek because I needed someone with medical skills on my ranch. I saved you because it was the right thing to do, but I'm asking you to stay now for an entirely different reason. Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. And what reason is that? Because I'm falling in love with you, Sarah O'Malley. The words hung in the air between them, sincere and unadorned, and I hope you might feel something for me too. The truth of his words resonated within her, giving voice to feelings she had been afraid to acknowledge. I do, she whispered. I have for some time now. Daniel's face transformed with joy. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. When Sarah responded, sliding her hands up to his shoulders, it deepened into something more, a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. I meant what I said that day. You are my gold, Sarah. The most precious thing I've ever found. The storm continued through the night, but Sarah barely noticed, lost in the wonder of Daniel's arms, his kisses, his whispered words of love. By morning, the decision had been made: her cabin would serve as her healing place, where those in need could come for help. But her home would be with Daniel. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Sarah stood beside Daniel beneath a canopy of golden aspen leaves. Ellis, beaming with pride, stood as witness alongside Mrs. Miller and a handful of neighbors who had come to know and respect the healer woman who had settled among them. The circuit preacher joined their hands together, and Sarah felt the last pieces of her broken life finally mend into something stronger, more beautiful than before. I take you as my wife, Daniel said, his voice steady and sure. My partner, my healer, my gold. And I take you as my husband, Sarah replied, tears of joy shining in her eyes. My protector, my home, my heart. As winter settled over the valley, bringing snow and long evenings by the fire, Sarah found herself truly at peace for the first time since her mother's death. The cabin by the creek flourished as her healing place, with people coming from miles around for her remedies. Daniel expanded the ranch, adding cattle to their horses, building toward the future they would share. On Christmas morning, as they exchanged simple gifts beneath a pine bough decorated with ribbons, Sarah placed Daniel's hand on her still flat stomach. I have one more gift, she whispered, watching his eyes widen with understanding. Come summer, there will be 3 of us. Daniel gathered her into his arms, his joy too great for words. As the snow fell gently outside their window, Sarah thought back to that terrible day in Copper Creek, when stones had rained down upon her, and hope had seemed lost. How strange that the worst day of her life had led her here, to this man, this love, this future that stretched bright and promising before them. What are you thinking? Daniel asked, his hand gently caressing her abdomen where their child grew. Sarah smiled, leaning into his embrace. That sometimes the darkest storms bring us to exactly where we're meant to be. And is this where you're meant to be, with a simple rancher in the middle of nowhere, Montana. This is precisely where I'm meant to be, Sarah answered, sealing her words with a kiss. With the man who saw my worth when everyone else saw only fear. The man who called me his gold.